I'm Pedro da Costa, editorial fellow here at the Peterson Institute for International Economics. I'm joined by senior fellows Ted Truman and Joseph Gagnon to discuss Saudi Arabia and its relationship with the United States. In particular, there's been a little bit of friction lately regarding some legislation that Congress is considering. Could you tell us a little bit about that, Ted?
So Congress is considering some legislation growing out of the 9/11 attacks, which involve adjusting the U.S. so-called Sovereign Immunities Act to allow U.S. citizens, the relatives of 9/11 victims, to sue the government of Saudi Arabia in the U.S. court for financial damages, and they have apparently, according to the New York Times, threatened to, if this goes through, to dump U.S. assets.
And so, Joe, what is the likelihood that they would do so, and what would be the economic impact of a Saudi move out of dollar assets if they did so?
Well, it's hard for me to gauge, the political internal dynamics in Saudi Arabia that might cause them to do this, and obviously it also depends on the legal implications of this law if it were to be passed. But just in general, if they were to sell U.S. assets and announce they're going to sell U.S. assets on a large scale, and they do have a lot of U.S. assets, it would be disruptive, and it would hurt them more than anything because it would reduce the value of their own holdings. But it certainly would cause a lot of worry and consternation in financial markets. It would push the dollar down. That actually by itself might be considered a good thing, since the strong dollar in the past couple of years has been the biggest drag on the U.S. economy.
So, Ted, it would be economically tenuous move for them, but it doesn't mean that politically they might not have such motivation.
Well, rationally, the financial people would say this would be a mistake, as Joe explained. It depends a bit on what they would do, whether they would just seek to move their assets to protect them, keeping them in dollars or in some way, or to get out of dollars completely. In the former, both would be very difficult because the assets are very large. Their current foreign exchange reserves about $600 billion. One can guess that 60 to 75% of those are in dollars, so that's $300 billion to $450 billion, and you just can't hide that amount of money around the world. And therefore, if they were to do this, as Joe said, precipitously, it would cause considerable turmoil in international financial markets, and they would not only lose money themselves, probably because they're driving the prices of the dollar and the assets in the wrong direction, but they would not win friends and influence people in terms of the global financial turmoil that would be at least set in motion, at least temporarily.
Sure, and Joe, if you could place this in the context of an oil deal in Doha that fell apart, and the economic backdrop for countries that are oil exporters. What would be the danger to Saudi Arabia and its dollar peg, for instance, if they were to move out of dollar assets? Well,
they could separate. The two decisions could be separate in principle. They could try to keep their dollar peg but not hold dollar assets. It would be kind of awkward because if you're trying to defend the value of your currency against the dollar, you're going to have to make two trades now for every one you would have before. But it could be done. It would seem odd. It would be more natural if they were going to do this to switch their peg to some other currency, perhaps, or to float, which would have probably some long-run benefits for them if they managed it well.
But short-term volatility in the market.
But further short-term volatility, yes.
And President Obama is headed to Saudi Arabia this week, so we might get some developments in this.
I would be flabbergasted if there's any truth behind this story. If there was not on the agenda to discuss this matter. It is fair to say that on the financial area, as well as other, the United States has been pretty close with Saudi Arabia in recent years. So it would be, I'm sure they will have a very frank conversation on this subject, assuming there's anything to be said. And maybe the president will say something about what he'll do with the legislation. He might veto it, but that veto might be overridden. That might inoculate him to some extent from this action if they were to take it. But I think it would still probably be a very foolish thing for them to do. It would not make them with many friends around the world, and they don't have that many friends.
Thank you so much, Ted, and thank you, Joe.